Welcome back to Modern Warfare 2. In this video, we are going through the best settings for controller, graphics, FOV, all that sort of stuff for if you are playing the game on console. And what I've done is I went through all of the settings and I found the ones that are the most important for a player to change. We're just going to go through those ones. And in the background, we just have some random gameplay footage from the beta because the game isn't actually released at the moment. It comes out tomorrow. And that way, you don't need to focus on what's happening on the screen. You just got to listen to the video and you can change all of the settings on your screen. So it's nice and easy. So there won't be any settings on the screen. I'll tell you exactly which ones we're talking about. And then you can go to those settings. Some will be in the basic, some will be in advanced. You just need to find a certain tab because that's the one thing I forgot to actually write down. So starting this one off, and a good thing about Modern Warfare 2 is you can actually essentially favorite different settings, so you can change them on the fly if you want to. And just quickly before we do get to the settings, if you are looking to pick up Modern Warfare 2, you can grab it cheap if you use the link in the description, which will take you through to CD keys. And if you make a purchase for any game through that site using the link in the description, you will also be directly supporting the channel at the same time. Also, if you enjoyed this video and it helps you out, then don't forget to leave a like on it. All support on the channel is greatly appreciated. And starting off with these settings, the on-demand texture streaming, you want to turn this off unless you've got really high internet speeds and stuff, because it just takes up your bandwidth. And all it does is it downloads textures as you're playing the game. It's just typically going to lower your performance. So there's no point really having it on, because I'd rather have performance basically running smoother than textures and stuff on the screen. It's not going to make the game potato settings. It's just going to make them a little bit more high definition. So it doesn't matter too much. Then when it comes to motion blurs, in Modern Warfare 2, you have two different settings. You've got motion blur for your weapon and for the world. And I would turn them both off. Motion blur is horrible in most games, especially you're playing a fast-paced shooting game. You're not going to want motion blur on. When it comes to the film grain, turn that all the way to 0 because that's going to add some grain that makes it look a little bit like a film. Essentially, it's a film grain. But you want to turn that off because you want the game to be as sharp as you possibly can get it without it being too over the top. Then when it comes to your depth of field, also turn that off because it's going to make the game really, really sharp. So you can see everything at different distances without it becoming blurry. Then when it comes to the Fidelity FX CAS, or the Contrast Adaptive Sharpening, leave that at about default, but change it if you need to, whether it's up or down. You don't want the game too sharp, as I said, but you don't want it looking too smooth at the same time. Then when it comes to your field of view, everyone's going to have a different preference to this, but what I recommend doing is start that off at its default setting, but slowly after every match increase it a little bit. So even if it's just by 5 or even 2, just put the field of view or the FOV up a little bit after every match until you are completely comfortable with it. Because if you go into your first ever match on the default setting and then you instantly bump it up to the max, the difference is going to be far too much. So I recommend start at default, slowly increase it every game, but you definitely don't want to stick at default because you want to see a lot more on your screen. It's just about finding that sweet point where you are comfortable with it. But not only that, it can be the difference of a game feeling really slow and sluggish, all the way up until the game feeling really smooth. It depends on your eyes and a load of different factors. There is also in Modern Warfare 2 third-person modes. So there is a third-person FOV, and I would just say do exactly the same thing with that as your standard FOV slider. Start at default, work your way up every match until you are 100% comfortable. And that is all of the graphics settings and stuff I would really change. Then jumping into the controller settings, when it comes to your button layout, I strongly recommend changing it to tactical. All it's going to do is switch around your right stick and your B or your circle button, and it just makes it easier for drop shots. Your melee, once you're used to it, it's just a lot easier to get on with. Then when it comes to your stick sensitivity, this is another one. Some people will say just bump it up to max. You're an absolute noob if you have it any lower. But I always start the game off on a low setting. Some games have been as low as 2, but typically on a Call of Duty game, I will set it to around 4. And then as you're playing, you're getting used to the game, slowly increase it because you don't really want to be stuck at a low sensitivity for a long time because your turning is going to be so much slower and players that do have a higher sensitivity are going to have a little bit of an advantage, like a slight advantage of aim flicking. So basically, if you're behind someone and they've got a really fast sensitivity, they can turn around quick and they might still kill you even if you've got the drop on them. Whereas if you have a fast sensitivity, you've worked on it for, say, even a week, slowly turning it up one every day, you've gone from 4 up to 10 or even 11 or something like that, or even like the highest sensitivity you can go, which I'm not actually sure what that is. But if you do have a higher sensitivity and you've gradually built up, you're still going to be used to it. And then if someone is behind you, they start shooting at you. Because you've got a high sensitivity, you've got a better chance of being able to turn around and kill them. Then when it comes to your ADS multiplier, I would turn it down slightly to maybe 0.90 or 0.80, because what it does is when you've got your normal sensitivity, this takes a percentage off it, so that when you are aiming down your sights, your sensitivity is a little bit slower than your typical of when you're not aiming down your sights. And it just means that the scopes and stuff will be a little bit slower, especially at the point where you first aim down your sight, and it's going to stop your weapon like flicking past your enemies. You can obviously leave it at default. This is just preference, but I'd probably put it on 0.90 or 0.80 just so that you can slow it down a little bit, just so that the ADS feels a little bit smoother and it's not as fast as your normal sensitivity, so that you've got a better chance of actually aiming on enemies and not all around them. Nobody wants to jump into a Call of Duty game playing multiplayer with potato aiming. And that's something I've had for years and will probably never change. Then further down in the settings, when it comes to the interact and reload behavior, I'd set this to prioritize interacting, so that if you're playing something like Warzone, you're going to be able to tap to interact with like weapon crates and things like that. And all you've got to do, if you're prioritizing your interact, is you just got to hold down your button to reload instead of pressing it. You can play it however you want to play it. These are just recommendations. You can do it the other way around. You can prioritize reload so that you're tapping to reload and holding to interact. But when it comes to Warzone and different game modes and stuff where you'll interact with doors and things, it's just going to be annoying having to hold down the button. Then when it comes to aim assist, I'd recommend turning it off, even using a controller, or at least try it with it turned off. Then if it's not for you, turn it back on, maybe try switching the type of assist. You have different types, being precision, focusing, and Black Ops style aim assists to choose from. But as I said, I'd recommend turning it off, because aim assist sometimes can be a little bit too strong and it's just going to slow down your aiming, especially like you start aiming, you've got a relatively high sensitivity, you start turning towards the enemy, then sometimes if it's really strong, it's going to slow you down. And it's actually going to be less beneficial having it on sometimes. But controllers are a little bit dodgy when it comes to FPS games, especially Call of Duty. So you might just want to keep it on and just keep it on the default settings. But I'd recommend at least trying with it turned off, just to see how it feels when you're aiming towards enemies. There's also custom sensitivity per zoom, and you can change that all if you need to. It's for different scopes and stuff. You'll have like 3 to 4 times, 5 to 6, and there's loads of different settings for it. And it all depends, like changing this one all depends on the range of your target, the scope size, there's loads of different things. And for someone playing traditional multiplayer modes like TDM, I would recommend leaving them default, because you don't often use massive scopes due to the maps being a little bit smaller. But if you're playing something like Ground War, you've got big open maps. If you're using, say you've got an 8x scope on or something like that, just a pure example, then when you're aiming down your sights, it might be a little bit too fast because your enemies are further away, so you might just want to lower certain sensitivities for the different zooms. All it's going to do is basically just fine-tune your aiming a little bit better when it comes to enemies being quite far away. Now with your input dead zones, I would say start these off as 0. This is all going to depend on your specific controller, but I would work your way up with the minimum for the sticks, so the minimum stick dead zone. I would start off 0, work your way up slowly. You've got to find the right spot for it, because this is going to depend on how much stick drift you have. If you've got an old controller like I have, I play on the Series X, but I'm still running an Xbox One controller. I saved my Series X1 for the PC gameplay. But with the Xbox One controller, I've had it for years. There's quite a bit of stick drift. So when I play, I typically put my dead zone for the minimum side up to 0.1, so that if I'm standing still, my controller's not automatically going to make my character turn. If you, on the other hand, have a brand new controller, you might find that keeping the minimum settings on 0 As I said, it all depends on your stick drift. Mine's quite bad, so 0.1 to maybe 0.2 or 0.20. That seems to work the best for me. And then when it comes to the maximum end of it, I just bump it all the way up to the top. And that way you get the full use out of your sticks. And then for your button dead zone, it's all going to depend on your buttons. If you've got a bit of a dodgy button, you might want to change this setting a little bit. But that's about it for the input dead zones. Then when it comes to grounded and automatic ground mantle, I would make sure these are turned off. It's going to stop auto mantling and it's going to give you control of jumping and peeking over a wall. And then you're going to have control separately of actually grabbing onto the wall itself and peeking over. Instead of you run to a wall, you jump and it automatically mantles, like automatically grabs onto the wall. You don't want that. You want to try and get as much control over the game as you possibly can, because you're just automatically going to do better. Naturally, you're going to do better if you have more control over the game. Then also when it comes to depleted ammo weapon switch, set this one to off, as you do not want your weapon auto switching if you run out of ammo. As I said, it's going to give you more control over the game. You're going to know what's happening and exactly when it's happening. You don't want the game auto switching your weapons if you run out of ammo, especially if you've just, if you're using your last mag and you're close to picking up some ammo. If it switches, it's just frustrating. Then the final setting we're going to look at and we're going to change is the quick C4 detonation. I would highly recommend turning that one on, so that when you throw your C4, you're going to detonate it on the next button press instead of throwing more, unless you do want to plant multiple at the same time. So game modes and stuff are going to be a factor in the quick C4 detonation setting, but I'd recommend turning it on because there's not going to be too many times where you're going to need to throw more than one. You can obviously just keep this setting off and then double tap the X or the square button, but it just makes it easier so that you've got one press of your lethal, and then to detonate the C4 once you've thrown it, you've got one more press. And that is all the settings we're going to take a look at. Those are the best settings for controller, for console, for Modern Warfare 2. And check out this video if you want to see other Modern Warfare 2 content on the channel. That's going to do it for this one. I'll see you in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.